One day a child will be born who will never meet another person younger than themselves, and nobody alive at the time will realize what that truly means. That ordinary moment may quietly mark the beginning of the final chapter. In a story that started hundreds of thousands of years ago, humanity often imagines its end arriving through catastrophe, yet the true ending could unfold so gradually that few people notice it happening. To understand how one person could eventually become the last human alive, we must first examine the remarkable scale of humanity today. More than 8 billion people currently share the planet, creating the largest and most interconnected civilization in human history. Cities never sleep, aircraft cross oceans continuously, and digital networks connect individuals across nearly every corner of the world. From this perspective, the idea of humanity disappearing seems almost impossible because our species appears larger and stronger than ever. Yet demographic trends reveal a surprising possibility, one that begins not with disaster, but with fewer children being born. Across many nations, birth rates have already fallen below replacement levels, meaning each generation becomes smaller than the one before it. If this pattern continued for centuries, the global population could begin a long and steady decline, unlike anything previously experienced. The process would not resemble collapse. Instead, it would feel like a gradual quieting of a once crowded and energetic world. Schools would educate fewer students, neighborhoods would contain fewer families, and entire regions might slowly lose population. For many decades, technology could compensate for these changes, helping smaller populations maintain large and sophisticated societies. Artificial intelligence and autonomous systems might perform tasks once requiring millions of workers across countless industries. At first, life might even improve because fewer people could place less pressure on resources and infrastructure. But as generations passed, the consequences of decline would become increasingly difficult to ignore. Entire towns might become abandoned, while transportation networks shrink to serve fewer destinations and fewer communities. Some cities would merge their services while others slowly disappear, as residents relocate toward larger population centers. Eventually, the population might fall from billions to hundreds of millions, a number that would once have seemed enormous. As the global footprint contracted, the remaining communities would naturally consolidate into highly efficient global hubs. Even then, humanity would remain a global civilization capable of preserving knowledge, culture, science, and technology. The greatest challenge would not be survival, but maintaining the complex systems built during eras of much larger populations. Power grids, communication networks, manufacturing centers, and transportation systems all depend upon constant attention and expertise. As populations continued shrinking, societies would increasingly rely upon automation to preserve the comforts of civilization. The world would become quieter, not because life vanished, but because fewer people remained to fill it with activity. Airports that once welcomed millions of travelers might operate only a handful of routes connecting the remaining population centers. Skyscrapers could stand for centuries after their builders disappeared, serving as monuments to a more crowded age. Generation after generation, the numbers would continue falling until humanity entered a phase no civilization has ever experienced before. For the first time in history, people might live knowing that humanity is not growing, but steadily approaching its final generations. And somewhere in that distant future, a small community may begin to realize that the end of humanity is no longer theoretical, but approaching. Centuries would continue passing as populations declined, transforming humanity from a global civilization into a collection of increasingly isolated communities. The remaining population might still number in the millions, yet entire continents could contain fewer people than modern cities. Many former capitals would become historical landmarks maintained by automated systems long after their political importance vanished. The world economy would simplify as fewer people required fewer goods, reducing the complexity that once connected nations. Trade would continue, but the enormous flows of products that once crossed oceans daily would steadily diminish. Knowledge, however, would remain humanity's greatest asset, preserved within archives designed to survive for thousands of years. Future generations would inherit detailed records of billions of lives, allowing them to remember a world they never experienced. As centuries became millennia, the decline would continue, reducing humanity to populations measured in thousands rather than millions. At this stage, every remaining settlement would hold immense importance because each community would represent a significant fraction of humanity. The loss of even a single settlement could noticeably reduce the total human population for the entire planet. Communication technologies would become essential because maintaining connections between distant survivors would preserve a sense of shared identity. Even then, conversations would grow quieter as fewer voices remained available to participate in the global discussion. Languages might slowly merge as populations shrank, creating a future culture very different from anything that exists today. Humanity would become increasingly aware of its own rarity, recognizing that every birth carries extraordinary significance. Children would grow up knowing that their generation is smaller than the one before it, and likely larger than the one after. Over time, the population could fall below 1,000 people, creating a reality unlike any previous era in human history. Every remaining individual would become known to most others, transforming humanity into something resembling a single extended family. Ancient nations, religions, and institutions might survive as traditions, yet the realities that created them would belong to the distant past. The planet itself would begin feeling larger because enormous regions of Earth would remain untouched by human activity. Forests could reclaim former cities while ecosystems expand into places once dominated by civilization and industry. The remaining humans would inherit a quieter planet filled with reminders of the billions who lived before them. Each preserved city, library, and monument would serve as evidence that humanity once covered the entire world. Eventually, the population could decline into mere hundreds, reducing humanity to a number smaller than many modern villages. At this point, every death would be deeply significant, because each person represents a measurable fraction of the species. The focus of civilization would shift from expansion and growth toward preservation, memory, and continuity. People might dedicate their lives to ensuring that human knowledge survives even if humanity itself eventually does not. Some records could be sent into space while others remain buried beneath Earth in structures built to endure. The goal would no longer be creating a larger civilization, but ensuring that humanity is remembered for as long as possible. As the final centuries approached, the remaining communities would understand that they are witnessing the closing pages of history, and somewhere among those remaining people a generation would be born that stands closer to the last human than to the first civilization. Eventually, the number of remaining humans would become so small that every birth and every death would alter the future of the species. The global population might decline from hundreds to dozens, reducing humanity to a scale once associated with a single village. At that stage, every remaining person would understand that they are living during the final era of human existence. Many would devote their lives to preserving stories, memories, and knowledge gathered across thousands of generations. The remaining settlements would likely remain connected through technology, sharing every important event across the entire species. A birth anywhere on Earth would become a global celebration because every child represents the continuation of humanity itself. Yet despite every effort, the long decline would continue, slowly reducing the number of people left on the planet. The day would eventually arrive when fewer than 10 humans remain alive, a number once smaller than a single family gathering. Each survivor would know every other survivor personally, and the entire future of humanity would rest among them. The final generation would grow older together while understanding that no generation will ever come after them. One by one, the remaining people would disappear, until eventually only 2 humans remain alive on Earth. Those final companions would carry the memories of an entire species and the weight of its extraordinary history. Eventually, a moment would arrive when one of them dies, leaving a single human being alive on the entire planet. For the first time in hundreds of thousands of years, humanity would consist of exactly one person. Every language, every culture, every memory, and every tradition would survive only within a single mind. The last human might spend years exploring silent cities, preserved archives, and places once filled with billions of lives. Every monument would tell a story, and every building would remind them of a civilization that no longer exists. The world itself would continue functioning in many places as automated systems quietly perform their final tasks. Yet with no one left to repair them, those systems would eventually fail one after another across the planet. The last human would witness a world becoming quieter with each passing year as civilization slowly fades away. Eventually, even the final human would grow old, carrying the complete story of humanity toward its conclusion. The significance of that individual would be difficult to comprehend because they represent an entire species. When their final day eventually arrives, a chapter stretching back hundreds of thousands of years would come to an end. There would be no witnesses, no ceremonies, and no announcements because nobody else would remain to observe it. The moment would pass quietly, yet it would mark one of the most significant events in the history of life. Forests would continue growing, oceans would continue moving, and life would continue without human observers. The traces of civilization would slowly fade while nature and time reshape the world over countless generations. Yet humanity's influence would not vanish entirely, because knowledge, artifacts, and messages may survive far into the future. Perhaps somewhere beyond Earth, a record of our species will continue traveling through space long after humanity is gone. And that final child from the beginning of our story would ultimately become part of a chain leading to the last human, reminding us that even the greatest civilizations begin and end with individual lives.